Hi, I'm Mary Tressler, editor here at O'Reilly. I'm here today with Travis Lowdermilk, who's the author of User-Centered Design. So I wanted to start off with just some foundational information about user-centered design. Could you talk a little bit about what it is and why it's important?
Right. So user-centered design is really a development and design methodology. It's a structure or roadmap of how to build great apps that your users love, right? And essentially, the premise of user-centered design is actually quite simple. If you involve your users in the design and development decisions of your application, you have a greater chance of actually delivering what it is that they want and need. And while this notion seems fairly obvious, it's actually really incredibly difficult to execute on. And many developers, and myself included, we have a hard time getting constructive or insightful feedback from our users. Many of us, of course, do the traditional bug report, and that's typically what's seen as feedback, the list of things that aren't working in the application. But oftentimes I find that as developers, we don't stop and take note of things that are working or ask different questions from our users to really get a fundamental understanding of what it is that they want other than just features or functionality.
Awesome. Great. So I've heard these other terms bounced around. User experience, HCI or human computer interaction, human factors. You hear them an awful lot, and I imagine they all fit under some sort of umbrella, but could you kind of break it down how user-centered design fits into all of these other terms that we're hearing about?
Sure. So UX, of course, is probably the word that we hear all the time. It's got that very buzzworthy feel to it, and it seems like everybody's talking about, especially in the developer space, what UX means and the implications for application development in regards to UX. And I think the biggest misnomer that developers have about UX is that it's just about making the application look pretty, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll hear developers they'll say they'll look at an app's design aesthetic and they'll say, "Oh, this has terrible UX." And now it's certainly possible that an application's design or appearance could impact the user's experience, of course, but really, what I want developers to understand is that UX involves so much more. It's really the complete package. So it concerns itself with many domains and disciplines, everything from psychology to anthropology, and in some cases even economics and that sort of thing. And so that's where HCI comes in. So you hear the term human-computer interaction, and that's the study of how humans relate to computing products. And that bore out of human factors, which was the study of humans as they relate to objects. So things like ergonomics and things came from human factors. And then there was a discipline within that focused just on computing products. And UX, of course, is a factor of HCI because the user's experience from end to end with the software product certainly rolls up into the interaction overall. And so user-centered design is actually a discipline within UX. It's a methodology or a way to achieve great user experience by going through things like usability studies, in the wild studies, doing surveys and that type of thing. And that's really where the book kind of comes in. That's where we're having a very kind of informal conversation, high level, to introduce developers to considering doing some of those kinds of exercises.
Interesting. Okay. So, to me, it sounds an awful lot like common sense, a common sense approach to design, to developing, and yet I don't think it's all that common. I think it seems to be picking up in terms of developers looking at it. But I'd like you to talk a little bit about why programmers should build their apps or design their apps this way. What's in it for them, really?
Yeah, and I think a lot of developers might be hearing this message and say, well, I'm already doing this. I'm already interacting with my users. And again, I think a lot of the times that comes in the form of, a web form on their website that says, hey, if you're having a problem, email me, that kind of thing, or maybe email me, the unhandled exception in my application. And again, that's a more kind of bug report focus. And really what the book is talking about is engaging users and asking the right kinds of questions. And I think it's becoming increasingly difficult for developers to build quality apps in today's landscape, especially if you look at the emergence of mobile computing and the notion of app stores. There's an incredibly difficult barrier to entry into these markets now, and especially if you're a lone developer or you're on a small team. And users really expect so much more, I think, from applications today. They're far more discerning about what they value and what they expect an application to do for them. So for developers, it's much more than just having an optimized or smooth running application with a bucket load of features. We have to really be cognizant and build experiences that really engage our users, that we make users feel as though we have understood what they needed, when they needed it, and how they needed it, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of that type of work is starting to fall on developers' desks now as they kind of move out of the battleship gray type applications, if you will, and start considering things like touch and mobile and voice. And so a lot of these developers that I've met, they don't have the design team standing by to tackle these challenges, and so they're in this new space trying to figure this out for themselves. And I think that's where my approach with user-centered design that I introduce in the book can really help them to, from a realistic standpoint. Being a developer myself, I know that we have a lot of other concerns and constraints that we have to do in actually physically building the application. And so it's a really common sense approach to, sitting down with users and getting to the heart of what it is that they need.
Okay, that's great. So part of the book is based on some of the lessons you've learned in your, with your own experiences in developing this way. Could you talk a little bit about, for those that haven't picked up the book yet, could you talk a little bit about some of the lessons that you have learned along the way in designing and developing this way?
Yeah, I think if you're doing user-centered design right and really kind of in this mindset, then frankly you're always learning. I think the best developers that I've met that I really kind of look up to, these folks have an insatiable desire for knowledge. They deeply care about making their apps the best. And it's interesting because their focus is a little bit different. They don't go out into the world trying to convince the world that the app that they've built is the best. Rather, they go out and try to observe and engage users in that world and modify their app so it meets their needs. And I think that's kind of a different focus. And so with this approach, you find that you are always remaining observant. You're always kind of asking questions. You never stop asking questions. And you're constantly looking for new insights that could be implemented into your own application. So myself, I'm fascinated with user behavior. I watch people use a gasoline pump or a self-help checkout kiosk. And I watch them and I see if they're struggling on what they might be struggling with, or do they seem happy when they're using it, or do they seem frustrated if they're complaining to their spouse about why it's not working. I kind of listen in and see what they're struggling with. And I think that's really the best lesson that I've learned when I started implementing this approach, is that there's so much insight simply by just listening and participating in what the user is saying. And so I think, again, to kind of drive this message home, it's more of getting out of that bug report, that feature, that stuff is always going to be important, but really kind of being vulnerable and going out into the space and really seeing users use your products, I think can provide you just an immense amount of insight.
That's great advice. Great advice for anybody building anything, right?
Right.
So, you obviously have your own experiences. I'd be curious to hear what you, if there are some examples from your own personal experience or industry examples of where you see this approach showing up in terms of, great applications or websites or anything like that, that are really grabbing the attention and delighting the user, right? Because that seems to be the goal.
Right.
So could you talk a little bit about where we might be seeing some of those benefits?
Yeah. Well, as you know, I co-host a weekly internet show about Microsoft development, and I've recently myself I've joined Microsoft as a UX designer. So a lot of my focus tends to be in that space. Now, the book is really for anybody, like you said, and frankly, it's for anybody building anything. It's kind of independent of development framework. But I think Microsoft has done a lot of great work in user research. Things like telemetry data, when Windows asks you if you want to participate in the customer improvement program, the folks that are kind enough to participate in that, they're sending anonymous usage data back to Microsoft on everything from, how many times did they click the start button, or how many, times they hit a function key or whatever. And this creates an incredible amount of data, and actually Microsoft has actually blogged about this in their development of Windows 8 about the latest changes that they've made and the direction they're kind of heading with their design philosophy. Now, while that's still under debate of whether or not that's the right approach or not, it's fine, but it is to be said that Microsoft has done an immense amount of research, and it really is fascinating on how they're responding to all of it. Another company would be that I often think about or I like watching is Facebook. Again, debatable on whether Facebook is user-friendly or not. Some people have some strong opinions about that, but we can all agree that Facebook has an immense amount of data, particularly in the social behavior, social graph realm. And it's really interesting to see how they're responding with things like the recent purchase of Instagram, and looking at how they're responding to how people take pictures and share them with one another. And so it's interesting to see how they're going about the space and modifying their website and continually updating it and expanding into different fields as a result of what they're observing from their users. Another company that I talk a lot about, in fact, I write pretty extensively about them in the book, is a company, small development firm called 53, based out of New York and Seattle. And they make a fantastic sketching application for the iPad called Paper. It's got this really fluid pen. It's really incredible stuff. But what's really great about it is that it's directly responding to what they've observed of people in the creative process, in that initial creative, idea flow. And it's really interesting on how their application responds to that. And I talk about that in detail in the book. Their app is very thoughtfully designed and considered for folks that are fleshing out their ideas and concepts. So I think when you start to look at user-centered design and taking a user-centered approach, you do pick up on and you start to look at how other companies are responding to their users.
That's great. So much of it is learning from your users and communicating with them and keeping that open dialogue going. Kind of a strange question for you, but are there times when you shouldn't be listening to your users, or where you should perhaps, I don't know, disregard, which sounds horrible to say given the topic here, but could you talk a little bit about that communication? Because I think oftentimes we're asking people for something and they don't necessarily always know what it is they want, or they're not able to articulate it.
Well, Steve Jobs, is famous for saying that, users don't know what they want. It's our job to kind of show it to them. And that certainly is true. And just because I'm being a user advocate and promoting a message in the book about, spending time with users and that they can actually provide a valuable insight, I'm not suggesting that we hang on their every word and implement everything that they say. Certainly, again, for us developers, it can be very difficult to have these conversations with users because they throw out all kinds of ideas that are totally not possible within the realm of technological constraints or economic constraints or, frankly, just time constraints. And so, there are times where you have to kind of, limit, or turn your interactions with certain users to make them more constructive. And I actually detail different types of personalities of users that can be kind of difficult to deal with and how you can use those difficulties to your advantage. Example in the book I use is a visitor directory that I built for a community hospital. It's a touchscreen kiosk directory that visitors can use when they are looking for a patient in the hospital. And oftentimes I'd go out in the lobby, when I'm getting coffee or whatever, and I'd spend some time if somebody was actually using it, and I'd kind of stand off to the side and watch them use it. And there was one time that a young woman and her mom were both using the application, and they looked like they were kind of having fun with it and talking about it. So I, walked up and said, "Hey, what do you think? Or were you able to find who you were looking for?" And the daughter seemed to have more of the understanding of what it was doing, and the mom was more observing. But and they both agreed that they liked it and they thought it was neat. And the mom actually suggested what would be great is if the tiles on the floor lit up to show her where they needed to go next. And of course, at first glance, we might say, well, that request is ludicrous. If I could make tiles light up on a floor, I'd be on an island somewhere, early retirement, if I could do something like that. But, and so I went back to my desk and I kind of thought a little bit about what was the heart or the crux of what it was that she needed. And it actually made sense in the sense that what my application was doing was providing the information. It was saying, hey, the patient that you're looking for is here, but there really wasn't any next step. And that's really at the heart of what the problem was, is that she didn't know what to do next, or where, do I turn left? Do I turn right? Where do I go? And so I actually used that insight and created some animations with the floor plan of the building, and actually had little dots that kind of, guide the user where to find the nearest elevator or where they're going to head next. And so I think that's kind of the overall point here, is that, users, if you ask them, oftentimes will, some users will give you an incredible amount of feedback that you can't use, and some that you can. And so it's really up to us to guide them through that process, learn to ask the right questions and how to kind of field them into getting the information that we might need. But that interaction, if I hadn't, actually stopped them and asked, that would have never shown up on a bug report, that type of feature. And so it turned out to be a really kind of winning feature that folks really enjoyed and were certainly gave us positive feedback on. So that's kind of what the process that I'm encouraging and the message that I'm encouraging in this book.
Right. So this is perhaps my final question, but a difficult one, because I don't know that there's any right answer to it, or it's difficult. So what do you think is the most important part of learning this? If I'm coming to this, I'm new to it, and I want to learn about user-centered design, is there like a piece of it that is more critical than other parts of it? Or, do you have some advice to give somebody that's new to the space, this methodology?
Right. Again, the book is really geared towards developers in the space. If you're already doing, design work and stuff, and you're already following these methodologies, there's plenty of other resources. But I think for developers in particular, this is a challenging new space, and some of them are really excited about exploring it, and they just don't know how to get started. And they go, "Well, what should I be doing?" And I think this book meets them, that perfect space. But really, the message overall is any user-centered approach is important. If you do a usability study with a couple of people, it's better than not doing any usability study at all. And the reality is, as developers, we're insanely busy, trying to write code, and it's an immensely time-consuming endeavor. And so, developers are probably listening to me right now, and they're saying, "Yeah, well, in a perfect world, I could spend all this great time with my users and ask them all kinds of great, poignant questions, but I don't have that." And so, I think this book approaches it from a very realistic standpoint, and it tries to get to the heart of what is a great place to start. So, Jacob Nielsen, who's a foremost expert in the space of usability, he has said that studying beyond actually 5 users starts to have less return on investment than the first 5. So in other words, observing at least 5 users using your product will give you the most amount of insight into your application's flaws if they exist. Now, there's debate on that 5 number, but whether 5 is enough, but all experts do agree on one number, and that's 0. If you interview 0 users, then you can guarantee that you're going to gain no insight. And so I think what I would encourage folks to do is to take a look at my book, of course, and it's very kind of informal, easy read. The idea is you can get through it in a few days, and see what processes make sense, and expand on those and modify them to meet your needs, and make them your own. So the most important thing you can do, I think, is just at least think about getting in front of your users, and having a constructive and meaningful dialogue with them, an organized dialogue, more than just handing them your phone app and saying use it and tell me what you think, but really actually having a plan and setting out what is this interaction going to look like between me and the user, and what questions do I need to have answered, and that sort of thing. And that's really where the book comes in. So I think that would be my best advice as far as this space is concerned.
That sounds like great advice. Well, I appreciate you making time today. Again,
absolutely.
User-Centered Design is the book. Pick it up. It's such an easy read, I found. I mean, I am not a designer or a developer, and I found reading it, picking up different pieces from it and applying it to what I'm doing and what I'm making here at O'Reilly.
Right.
It does make a big difference when you start to think about it and try to build in that mindset to whatever you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you.